So for Christmas, I asked my best friend what her favorite Five Nights at Freddy character was because she's a huge FNAF fan, and she said Grimm Foxy. So I set out to make a homemade Grimm Foxy figurine because I don't have any money, and this is how I did that. So I started out with some polymer clay, which I sculpted around pieces of tinfoil because I didn't want to use up too much clay because that stuff is expensive. This is my first attempt at making Foxy's head. Here's me trying to remove it from the tinfoil. It didn't really work, so I tried this other method where I was going to try and use plastic to make it easier to remove the head from the tinfoil, and it didn't really work. It wasn't a great idea. Here's me attempting it, and it not working. So I went back to the original tinfoil. I pretty quickly realized that I wasn't going to be able to cook it without the tinfoil in it. It was just wasn't going to hold the shape. So I started sculpting it around the tinfoil and decided that I would figure it out after it was cooked. This is me sculpting it around the tinfoil, bulking it out a little bit because Foxy has that sort of, fox shape with the little fur pieces that go out on her cheeks. I don't really know if Foxy is a boy or a girl, so getting into the finer details, I started using my sculpting tools, which are these little silicone brush things. I started forming the eye sockets and the nose hole, and for this I used my X-Acto knife because I wanted to be able to remove the clay easily. And I realized that if I carved the clay with the X-Acto knife, it gave that rough metal look that Grimm Foxy has. Then I took a little piece of wire and bent it in half and kind of squished the sides together to make it into a pretty sturdy double wire to use for Foxy's snout, because there's a little piece of armature that kind of pokes out from his face. I held it up to the head and realized that it was way too long. Yeah, that's looking a little crazy. So then I went back and trimmed the wire. Here it is all trimmed and inserted into the face hole. And then I'm adding a little piece of clay on the end for the nose. I bent and shaped another little piece of wire to use as the lower part of the muzzle. But then when I tried to measure it with the face, I realized it was way too small. So I made another one that was much bigger. But alas, it was too big. So I went back with my wire cutters and clipped the ends off, which did kind of make it fall apart a little bit because I cut off the part where the wire was like joined. So, and then on the muzzle there are these little like arches that connect the nose piece to the top jaw, and I tried to make them out of wire here and then kind of realized that it wasn't gonna work trying to attach them to each other, so I decided that was gonna be something I would do after the clay was baked with hot glue and cardboard or paper. So then I'm moving on to constructing the jaw, which was incredibly easy. I just made this kind of tongue shape out of the clay and then stuck some wires in the back of it. This next piece that I'm making looks a little crazy until everything gets assembled later, but it's going to be the glowing spine that's at Foxy's core. And then this is the chest part of the abdomen that I'm getting started on. And I decided to just rough out the shape with the clay first, and then I started carving out the missing chunks of metal with the X-Acto knife. I used pieces of wire to poke holes in the sides of the torso so that I would be able to insert the arms later. This is something that I had to do with all of the hollow pieces, like the head, the torso, and the crotch diaper part. But I used the X-Acto knife to make a slice all the way around it so that after it was baked, I would be able to trace that slice again with the X-Acto knife and then hopefully pop it off of the tinfoil. Once everything was out of the oven, I was able to remove them from the tinfoil balls pretty easily for the most part, using my X-Acto knife to kind of pop the edges off. I went back in with the X-Acto again to smooth out the edges and cut off any hanging bits of polymer clay. After all that, I was ready to start on the next batch of clay pieces, so I cut some wire that I would use as the armature for the arms. I bent these little loops in the wire to mark out where the joints and the shoulders were. I wrapped some tinfoil around the wire to bulk out the shape of the arms. I had a hard time making both arms even, so even though I start to carve here, you can see that after that I added a lot more clay to both of the arms just so that they would both start out the same size instead of trying to sculpt them both individually. I finished the upper arms and then I moved on to the lower abdomen piece of it, the kind of diaper shaped piece. Started with a ball of tinfoil just like I did for all the other hollow pieces, and then I added the clay around that. I added some leg holes so that I would be able to get the legs in once they were sculpted. And then I cut pieces of wire to use for the legs, just like I did for the arms. I used the same process for the legs that I used for the arms. It was wire and then tinfoil and then clay. Then I attempted to make the ears out of clay, and it really didn't work. The clay just didn't hold its structure enough to make the ears out of. I decided that after everything was baked and assembled, I would just make the ears out of cardboard. Once I gave up on making the ears out of clay, I went back to the legs and I added these just balls of clay at the bottom where the feet were going to be so that I could later glue cardboard around that to make the metal foot. And then my cat infiltrated my workstation. She wanted to help. She wanted to be a sculptor. No. Back to the clay. I started making Foxy's hand because Grimm Foxy has one hand and then the one hook. I kind of just made a ball of clay, smushed one of those double bent wires into the wrist part, and then used just single wires to mark out all of the fingers. Foxy has these spikes that extend from the back of her torso, so I sculpted those out of clay and tinfoil. And then this is me making the second smaller jaw, the same way I made the big one, just with the two pieces of wire and the weird tongue-shaped piece of clay. And then I remembered that I was going to need teeth for this thing to hot glue on later, so I just took these little rolled pieces of clay and cut them in half with my X-Acto. In a very risky way. I was really scared that I was going to accidentally cut my fingers. I didn't somehow, but I just made a bunch of teeth that I put all together on this piece of tinfoil and just baked in this big pile. Then I stuck that batch of stuff right in the oven. When it came out, I took Foxy's hand and added balls of clay to the fingers. I added Foxy's forearms to the arm pieces that had the biceps on them. I used the same process that I used for the first arm pieces, which was just the wire, the tinfoil, and then the clay. Then I had to remove the tinfoil from the diaper piece that I had made before. It was harder than removing the tinfoil from the other pieces just because I didn't cut this one in half. But it ended up being fun. I just had to cut up the tinfoil and pull it out piece by piece instead of taking the whole ball out at once. Foxy's lower legs are more like metal poles than calves, so I just wrapped clay around the wires and would finish those with cardboard and hot glue when they came out of the oven. And here are all of the finished sculpted pieces of Foxy. I dug through the trash and found this old mac and cheese box that I was going to use for all of the cardboard bits that I needed. I started the feet without much of a plan, really. I just cut out these shapes to put on the bottom of the feet and then cut out other pieces to go around them as I went. Then I cut and glued on these little triangles to work as the metal claws that come out from the feet. I used this pad of scrapbook paper, picked out a sheet that I didn't think I was ever going to use, and cut strips of that. To make the ridges on the calves, I used those strips of paper, some glue, and this dotting tool to glue the paper around the calves. At this point, the legs were kind of unstable, so I took hot glue and just added it into the joint between the calves and the thighs to make it more stable. On a little piece of cardboard, I traced out the hook that Foxy has for a hand, and then I glued it onto another piece of cardboard so that it would be a little bit thicker. I set that aside to dry, and then I started working on the wires that come off of the legs. The armature wire that I had been using for the limbs was kind of too thick to make sense, so I had this beading wire that I decided to use instead. Then I cut out the hook. It wasn't dry yet, so the two pieces of cardboard fell apart after I had cut it out, but that was fine because I was going to hot glue it together anyways. Then I went back to the head and I took these little strips of cardboard and glued them to the muzzle to create those loops that connect the nose to the jaw. I glued some pieces of cardboard to the base of the spine, and then, like I did for the lower legs, I glued strips of paper around the spine to create the ridges. Once all the pieces were done, I decided to assemble him off camera because it was kind of difficult, but here's that. And there it is, all put together. I spent like an hour with tweezers removing all the hot glue strings from assembling. It was finally time to start painting this thing. I went through and added a base coat of brown to the entire body. Except for the spine, because the spine is like fire, so I added a base coat of orange to that. Went back and added black on top of the base coat for the legs. I did this anywhere that was going to be metal. Then I took black acrylic paint and watered it down a ton and used that on all of the brown bits to add some depth. Then I went over all of the brown parts again, dry brushing orange and red to create Foxy's color. On all the black pieces, I dry brushed white for the metal. Then I realized that one of the legs was kind of loose, so I went back in with hot glue and added extra glue around where it attaches to the torso. Then I just painted over the fresh glue with black paint and it ended up fine. For the metal parts, I decided to use this metallic nail polish that I got from Claire's forever ago. It is the most metallic thing ever. It's so much better than any acrylic silver paint that I've ever used. Then I just brushed that over all of the metal parts using the nail polish brush that came with it. I added more red and yellow to the fire in order to give it more depth. And then I also painted some orange paint into the holes that are all over Foxy's body so that you can see that the fire is glowing through. And just like that, the painting was all done. So this foxy figurine was not freestanding, so I decided to use this piece of wood and these dowels and some really thick wire that I had to make a stand. Added cardboard squares to make it look like the checkerboard floor at Fazbear's Pizza, and then I painted those like that too. Then I splattered paint and dry brushed the tiles to make them look dirty and gross. Then I added some silver to the pole. Then I had this really thick gel gloss stuff that I painted over the tiles to make it look like linoleum. I'm not sure that it completely worked, but it did seal them, so I guess that was fine. And then, the best part of this entire thing, I had this glow-in-the-dark acrylic paint that I added to all the fiery bits of Foxy so that they would glow in the dark. Since the glowing paint was green, it messed up the color of the fire a little bit, so I just went over it and lightly brushed some more of the orange so that it got its color back. It kind of ended up looking like mac and cheese, but that was okay. Off camera, I sprayed sealant on the whole thing so that it wouldn't get damaged, but here is the finished Grimm Foxy. Guys, I worked my butt off on this thing. I probably took like 20 to 30 hours on it total, and my friend really liked it when she opened it when I gave it to her for Christmas, so I think it was worth it. Let me know what you guys think. It's hard to see it glowing in the dark on camera, but I promise it really does glow. That is my finished Grimm Foxy figurine and stand that I made for it. Thank you for watching.